Oh.
You had anticipated that there would be financial, issues raised. Were there any other issues that you just didn't think of, and that as soon as the law went into effect, they started popping up?
Yeah, I would say that the thing that we really had not thought about, I mean, maybe we should have, but it's a learning experience. I think the biggest thing in terms of unexpected issues has been, leading up to, when we passed the legislation, leading up to implementation, law enforcement remained relatively neutral. They did not in any way oppose this bill. Certainly a lot of prosecutors thought it was a fairer way to do things. Like there really was, bipartisan support for this bill, and also, a situation where you had groups like mine, like Drug Policy Alliance and the ACLU, being aligned with the Attorney General's office, where often we're not aligned on issues. So there was a lot of support. And then when the law went live, there is a cultural situation on the ground that exists where law enforcement is used to being able to arrest someone. And because we didn't have a 48-hour rule, because a lot of people who were poor ended up sitting in jail, now we do have people who within 24, 48 hours are back out and pending trial, which of course is the whole point of the law, and it is as it should be in the United States of America. But I think law enforcement was used to a system where they could lock someone up and they stayed locked up until their trial. At some point they would plead and get time served or whatever. And so I think there's been some frustration with law enforcement about arresting people and seeing them released that requires some continued education and outreach. But we had not really thought about that moving forward. And we've even had the mayor in Jersey City has expressed some concerns about this, and a few legislators. And I think so far we've been successful at explaining this system, and not just, it's helpful not just for us, but obviously, our Attorney General's office has been very helpful in explaining, this is the way criminal justice works. You get a sentence when you've been convicted. When and if you've been convicted, you don't serve a sentence just because you've been accused of a crime. And so, but it has been interesting, and it's also been something that the bail industry has taken advantage of. I mean, they have a couple different websites now, and they post things every day, and some of the things they post are just really the police blotter. So and so was arrested with 10 bags of heroin, free to go. Well, yeah, you're free to go until your day in court, but again, it's one of those sort of things that can sound bad to the general public and that you need to do some education on. So if there's a lesson learned, I would say to people to do that education, as much as you can ahead of time so people understand this.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about the bail bonding industry because I know that they were very opposed to these efforts when the law was being proposed, and they fought as hard as they could to prevent the law from going into effect. But so you talked a little bit about what they're doing now. That sounds kind of tame, though, just basically, talking about what's going on in the courts. Have they tried to exploit in any kind of way?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not really tame in the sense that legislators get worried about this kind of bad media attention. Mm-hmm. And there's still a lot of concern. I mean, crime rates are at 30, 40-year lows, and we have in the country had a shift on criminal justice. Well, at least at the state level, we're having some backsliding at the federal level. But this is still something legislators are sensitive to. And so you listing just a bunch of people that were arrested for breaking into someone's house or stealing, so whatever it would be, and released, even though it makes no sense and it's as things should be in terms of a system, and the person's been determined with a validated evidence-based assessment that they're going to show up for court and they're not going to commit a new crime, it's still something legislators worry about. And I think it's something that they have taken. There was one case of someone where there was a murder by someone who had been released pending trial, which could and have and did happen under money bail. I mean, there's no 100% risk-free system, but they've exploited that fairly successfully. We know they've, taken that story out to California and places like that, to try and, deter reforms in those places. And, there's also a couple pieces of legislation that would gut bail reform in New Jersey that would basically put money bail first as the option, reinstate that. And, they've tried to move that legislation, and they've had a couple hearings. So far, we've been successful at keeping that from going very far. But, that's there, and, they simply they haven't given up. I mean, and they're just, beating this drum of, oh, this is a disaster. And, if they can get a local police chief in some city to say, oh, no, I don't like this, that means a lot to legislators. And so, there is this pushback. And I think we recently saw our Administrative Office of the Courts and our Attorney General tweaked their guidelines a bit in terms of gun cases and when someone's released pending trial or detained on a gun charge. And that's been the piece that's come up most. And, part of that was to address the concern that some elected officials were, expressing, because that's been the thing that I would say that the bail industry has focused on most. Oh, people arrested, with a gun and released. Although someone arrested with a gun, and released could be a very low risk individual. It could be somebody who has not, harmed anyone, was just, not allowed to have a gun for whatever reason, didn't legally possess it, and those charges should be evaluated the same way any other charge is evaluated. But, they're out there exploiting that stuff. And I think the key thing is, they're exploiting it not just to try and roll this back in New Jersey. They're exploiting it to say it's a cautionary tale of what other states shouldn't do because things are in their, framing, have gone so wrong here in New Jersey, even though that's far, far from the truth.